Welcome back for video 2 of me building a stock for my Savage 308. So where do you want to start with a stock design? First off, you have to decide what you want. There are tons of places that design and sell stocks, and the sky is the absolute limit for fit, finish, and materials. Really, the decision needs to be made based on what the purpose of the stock is meant for. You want a hunter stock, it needs to be light enough to handle the recoil and easy to handle quickly. Look at some of the beautiful older wooden stocks that manufacturers used to put on their hunting rifles as a great example. They were perfectly fit, finishes were outstanding, and they made the gun work for its intended purpose. And those are just the regular guns. Not too many manufacturers really put in the work anymore unless you're buying a very high-end rifle or shotgun. In my case, I want more of an accuracy-focused stock, much like a bench rest or F-class. I own a really nice Manor stock for my 300 PRC, and if I wanted to spend a considerable amount of money again, I'd buy another. However, I want a wood stock, and Manor's only works in carbon fiber. I also want to make a few changes on the Manor's pattern, while being able to put a Savage action into it with an AICS DBM. The changes I want to make: I want the stock completely flat and in line on the forearm and butt of the rifle for tracking on bags and arrest. My Manners does have a bit of an angle in it, and while the stock is great, I want something a little bit different. I will admit I do like how serious rifle work stocks look and pulled some inspiration from them as well. My Savage 308 had a Voice Pro Varmint on it. I think I paid $150 for it. It was serviceable, and at that time, it was a good enough solution. As my shooting and reloading skills increased, I found that it was severely lacking in a few places, and that's what got me here. I'm a decent woodworker and I like to work on firearms, so combining these two things for a project was inevitable. This blank was given to me by a good friend. We pulled a nice piece of curly maple out of the rack for the spine, and he found a nice piece of cherry with the appropriate grain direction for the outside. The maple looks really nice on its own, and I thought about doing the entire blank in maple, but I really didn't want that light of a color. Curly maple is also fairly hard, and the grain really doesn't run in one specific direction, so it is resistant to shearing, which is very important in areas like the wrist or grip of the stock. The cherry isn't nearly as strong, but it looks great with a clear finish, and while it contributes to the strength of the stock, it's really not its primary purpose. We cut boards up, glued them up, put about 50 clamps on it, and went to lunch. Came back a couple hours later, pulled out the clamps, called it a day, and I was the proud owner of a 36-inch long, 8-inch tall, 2¼ inch thick blank. This video, we are going to concentrate on 3 items. Number 1 will be design. This is not really much more than a 2-scale, full-size sketch that would be used later for cutting out the stock. Also helps work out the details of everything we'll end up. It's a lot easier to fine-tune things on paper than it is on the blank. Number 2 will be the inlet for the trigger, DBM, and recoil lug. The Savage Action has a fairly complicated inlet in comparison to a Remington 700. Number 3 will be cutting in the barrel and the action channel. This is pretty straightforward but needs to be accurate as it sets the action height, which everything else is based on. And as always with any project I do, plan A never quite works out, and I have to move on to plan B or even plan C. The design itself is pretty simple in all reality. I had a wish list of several things: long length of pole for someone who is 6'7", flat fore end and butt so it rides nice on a rest, and a hard rear bag, 3/4 width on the bottom of the butt so it'll ride in my bags, good recoil reduction so it doesn't beat me up, cheek risers so it's more adjustable, and it needed to be from wood. I've looked around at really nice bench rest stocks like the ones from Cirrus for a few ideas. I use my Manor stock as a pattern since I do like its overall shape and size. I had to incorporate some of the things from the old Boyd's as it has some Savage inlet in it. So I gathered a heavy piece of craft paper and a few tools to measure and draw with. I did a takeoff on the Manors to get my overall dimensions and drew that up. Then I added in the features I needed for the Savage action. Then I started tuning, adding features, making changes in dimensions. After about an hour, I ended up with a 2-scale drawing that I was happy with. Once I had the design, I just had to start laying out the blank itself. The inlet for the Savage action was the most complicated part, and I used a handful of ways to transfer that data to the blank. In some places, I measured and drew in items, and sometimes I simply lined things up and did transfers to get them where they needed to be. The good thing about an inlet, if you're a little off a little bit, it will be okay. The action will probably cover it. You also need to start out a little tight on the inlet. It's a lot easier to cut a little more off than it is to try and add wood back on. The most important locations for the inlet are where the front and rear action screws are. They control where the action sits in the blank. I was a bit off on those, and while I was able to recover from that mistake, I should have taken more care in the first place. Once you have the inlet drawn onto the blank, you can actually start to cut away wood for it. A good selection of decent Forstner and brad point bits and a drill press with a depth stop are essential here. You can see here I drilled in the front and rear action screws big enough for the lamp rod pillars to slip in. Then I proceeded to start removing material for each location. Once I had it hogged out, I went back with a sharp chisel and started to clean up each pocket. After about an hour of screwing around with this and not really getting the results I wanted, I decided that it was time to change how I was doing this. Hence, Plan B. I own a couple of 3D printers and have used them before to create router templates. However, those are always for bearing guided bits, which generally have a diameter of a ½ inch, which is not tight enough for the inlet in a lot of places, and certainly not for carbide cutters that aren't guided. At this time, I bought an inexpensive bushing kit for my router and 4 1/4 inch 4-flute end mills in regular and long lengths. I sat down and drew up the inlay again on paper and measured everything in millimeters, as everything with 3D printers is in millimeters. I had the drawing and then proceeded to draw up the master template in SketchUp, adding 0.80 millimeters as the setback for the 1/4 inch bushing. It took me 3 design revisions until I was happy enough with the third version. After that, I drew up 3 more plates to allow me to hit specific shapes and depths the Savage inlet requires. This makes life as easy as I possibly can for myself. My efforts in material removal were not totally in vain. Having all the holes opened up and roughly to depth saves you a ton of time with the router, and I highly recommend doing so. It really was as simple as putting down some good double-sided tape, lining up the template, and going at it. In one of the photos, it shows the tape and the square I taped to the blank to get me a repeatable stop for every template. I did eventually burn up the 1/4 inch bushing, as the deflection of the end mill eventually ate the bushing. So at this point, I jumped up to the 9/32 inside diameter bushing. I did have to modify my templates, as I had to put the setback from 0.80 millimeters to 1.6 millimeters. After 20 minutes on the computer and a couple of hours on the printer, I was back in business. The last pass was pretty sketchy, as that is a ton of stick out on a 1/4 inch cutting tool. All I can say is take it slow, only increase cut depth, maybe 2 millimeters or a 16th of an inch per pass, to avoid bad things like snapping off your bit from happening. The final result is very passable and, most importantly, accurate. Don't mind the little bit of depth count you see. Most of this will get cut away when we inlet the barrel and action channel. Tools used were my router with a plunge base, a couple of 1/4 inch 4-flute end mills, a bushing set, and my 3D printed templates. The end mills in wood do cut slower, as they are designed to cut metal, so slow, steady cuts and small increases in cutter depth are mandatory. Originally, my plan was to use my router lift that is in the end of my table saw. It's powerful and precise, which is the perfect combination for spinning large router bits. I did a little layout to figure out the depth, the center, and how far I needed to cut. However, like I said, sometimes you got to go to plan B. In my case, the test channel I cut into the top of the blank was wandering slightly. I checked and reset my router table setup, and it was just as bad. I ended up tracking the issue to a very slight 1/32 inch or less twist in the blank that you will never see in the finished stock. So plan B was a much more difficult setup with my handheld router, which doesn't care about that slight twist. After a lot of screwing around, I was able to find dead center on the top of the blank with my centering bit. The first cut was with a 1/2 inch carbide straight cutter, and I was happy with how it centered up in the stock, so I moved on to the 1-inch clove cutter. That cut was spot on after a couple of tiny adjustments. From this point, it's just take a cut, drop the bit down, rinse and repeat. I ended up cutting the barrel channel to 1 1/4 inches, which will handle any barrel diameter I would ever want to use on this rifle. The action itself is 1.350 in diameter, so I had to make adjustments in the jig to get approximately 1/16 inch of clearance on each side for the dev count I used for bedding. After I was done, the action dropped right in, and the clearance I wanted was looking good. Tools used were a router with my large fixed base, 1 inch and 1 1/4 inch cold bits, 1/2 inch straight cutter, a centering bit for the router, and various measuring tools. Overall, it went pretty well. Now, the router table not working out was a bummer, but I was able to get it done with the hand router. One thing I would change in this process, the templates for the inlet routing and how I index them on the blank. I was pretty much winging it with my good eye, and it's going to cause some issues further on in this video series. I should have kept my hole for the front and rear action screws the same size as the 1/4 28 screw the action uses, and just drop the templates directly on and bend in perfect location every time. I do believe I could tighten up my templates a bit more as well, and if I ever do another Savage inlet, I'll be refining that operation for sure. That's it for this video. Next video will be pattern routing the stock, cutting in the rest of the inlet for the DBM and trigger from the bottom side, and shaping the stock. So stay tuned. If you have questions or comments, please leave them below. Thanks for watching.